uncorking the issues, pouring clarity into Temecula Valley politics. I'm your host, Grapevine, and today's episode is called Let's Woke Up. Because if you've been told that woke is the problem in Temecula Valley, it's time to pause, take a breath, and ask a more honest question. What does the woke versus anti-woke framing actually change here in Temecula Valley? The short answer is this: it doesn't solve problems. It distracts from them. Over the last few years, national culture war politics have been imported directly into local government across Temecula Valley, especially into school boards and increasingly into city councils. These debates arrive loud and urgent, framed as emergencies. But once the shouting stops, very little actually changes on paper. What does change is how our local institutions function. We hear claims that schools are being taken over by radical ideology, that teachers are indoctrinating students, that city staff are secretly pushing agendas. But when you look at what local governments and school districts here are legally allowed to do, most of that fear simply doesn't hold up. School districts in Temecula Valley do not write state curriculum standards. They do not get to ignore civil rights law. They do not get to decide which students deserve protection and which don't. City councils do not get to opt out of housing mandates. They do not control gas prices, inflation, or state environmental law. What they do control is governance. And that's where the real impact happens. Because the woke versus anti-woke framing doesn't dramatically change policy. It changes behavior. Public meetings stop being about solutions and start being about performance. Elected officials posture for applause instead of asking hard questions. Staff members become targets instead of professionals. In Temecula Valley, we've seen meetings where public comment turns into intimidation, where teachers, librarians, and administrators are accused of malicious intent simply for doing their jobs, where experienced staff quietly leave rather than endure hostility. That's not accountability. That's dysfunction. And the consequences are not abstract. When governance breaks down, everything takes longer. Decisions get delayed. Mistakes increase. Trust erodes. Nowhere is this more damaging than in schools. Public education is not a battleground. It's a public good. And when culture war politics take over school boards, students pay the price first. Teacher morale drops. Administrators become risk-averse. Curriculum decisions are made out of fear rather than evidence. Students feel the tension. They watch adults argue about them instead of advocating for them. You can win a culture war talking point and still lose educational outcomes. And too often, that's exactly what happens. Let's also talk about who stays engaged in local democracy and who leaves. Moderate residents, people who care deeply about their communities but don't want to scream into a microphone, start to disengage. They stop attending meetings, they stop volunteering, they stop running for boards and councils. What remains are the loudest voices and the most ideologically driven candidates. That's not grassroots empowerment. That's a narrowing of representation. And it doesn't reflect Temecula Valley as a whole. Most people here are busy. They're commuting. They're raising families. They're worried about housing costs in Menifee, traffic in Murrieta, water rates across the region, and whether their kids will be able to afford to stay here as adults. Those issues don't disappear because we argue about labels, but the labels do a very effective job of redirecting anger. Instead of asking why schools are underfunded, we argue about language. Instead of addressing mental health needs, we debate whether compassion itself is political. Instead of holding systems accountable, we fight each other. This pattern is familiar. Culture wars thrive when people are frustrated but disconnected from real levers of power. And there are real, measurable costs to this approach. Taxpayer-funded legal fees from lawsuits that never needed to happen. Consultants hired to manage controversy instead of improve services. Recruitment costs when experienced staff leave public service entirely. Higher insurance premiums for districts and cities labeled as unstable. That money does not go to classrooms. It does not go to road improvements. It does not go to public safety or community programs. It disappears into preventable conflict. And here's an important clarification. This isn't about dismissing parents' concerns. It isn't about ignoring accountability. And it isn't about pretending schools or governments are perfect. It's about believing that solutions should be evidence-based, inclusive, and focused on outcomes rather than outrage. It's about understanding that inclusion is not indoctrination, that representation is not erasure, that protecting vulnerable students does not harm others. and it's about rejecting the idea that constant anger is a governing philosophy. So, let's ask better questions here in Temecula Valley. Instead of asking whether something is woke or anti-woke, ask whether it actually helps people. Does it improve learning? Does it make government more transparent? Does it strengthen trust between institutions and the community? Does it make this valley a better place to live for everyone, not just the loudest voices? Local government should be boring in the best way, functional, transparent, focused on results. It should spend more time fixing problems than fighting symbols. The woke versus anti-woke framing doesn't make Temecula Valley safer, smarter, or more prosperous. But waking up to how that framing is being used just might. This has been Uncorking the Issues, pouring clarity into Temecula Valley politics. I'm Grapevine. Until next time, stay informed, stay engaged, and don't let distraction replace democracy.